Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from a brewer I've never tried from before, so always exciting. This is also the first time I've reviewed a beer from a brewer that's based in the city in which I was born, and this is from Trimtab Brewing Company. They're based in Birmingham, Alabama. This beer is called Language of Thunder Cumulus. It's an Imperial Stout that clocks in at 9.7% ABV, and it's been bourbon barrel aged and brewed with Madagascar vanilla and coconut. So, first things first, a very, very large bottle here. In terms of label art, it looks pretty cool. There's kind of a foil kind of aspect to that lightning bolt coming down on the label, but otherwise a very, very clean design. We've got us a nice wax dipped cap here, so get a nice pointy end of our bottle opener. We'll score underneath the cap, as we always do. So we can get that wax out of the way, hopefully get a good grip. Move the glass onto that side. See if we can get a good grip right out of the gate. No, but we can clear some of that wax off. There we go, all of it off. Now I should be able to get up under here. There we go. All right, it's gonna clear little residual so we don't get any wax dripping down in. All right, gonna get this poured right in our stout glass here. Ooh, very dark, quite thick as it pours out here. I'm gonna give it a chance to form a head, give it a little agitation. This is a thick one. I'm gonna back it off a bit, slow it down just a bit. Not a chance at getting that whole bottle in there. Very, very large bottle indeed. All right, so visually, as expected, it is an Imperial Stout. It is absolutely pitch black. There's not a suggestion of light getting through there. I tell you, I can already smell that bourbon barrel coming off of this beer. Good 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from my face. In terms of the head, no problem forming a head, but I can see it's collapsing relatively quickly, and it's due, I'm guessing, in large part to this one being actually relatively active in terms of carbonation. It's hard to see, but I can see the activity going there. But it's settled down a little bit, got a nice creamy head. Let's get right up for a proper sniff. Yeah. Oh yeah, so that bourbon barrel really jumps out at you. There's definitely a nice boozy sense to the beer. It does have a boozy aroma as well as bourbon. The Madagascar vanilla is definitely coming out. Coconut comes out as well, but it's a lot more subtle. That's kind of the background aroma coming off of this. The barrel, as you would expect, is in the forefront. Slight booziness and that vanilla right behind it. So it smells really, really nice. Head is still slowly settling down here, but still has a nice creamy pad. That's settled down enough for my liking. We're gonna jump right in, see what this one's about. Ooh, that's a big, rich beer. Very, very roasty. Very roasty. Bourbon comes in nice and strong. Really pairs well with the depth of that roast. They used a lot of deeply roasted malts in this beer. It's very, very deeply roasted. The vanilla comes through as well. Really does pair quite nicely with that bourbon flavor that comes through from the barrel aging. Coconut, just like on the aroma, it's there, but it's subtle. It's background. So it's background on the aroma and it's background on the flavor palette, but it's definitely discernible in both the aroma and in the flavor profile. So texturally, let's talk about this beer. In terms of mouthfeel, you can definitely feel the resistance to it. It's got a mild sense of viscosity, but it's not super thick and syrupy. You can just feel the inherent resistance. It's nearly 10% on an Imperial Stout. That's to be expected. In terms of the body, it definitely has some heft to it. This is a weighty, weighty beer. In terms of, aside from the general thickness of the mouthfeel, what about creamy, any kind of silky, other textural nuances? Not really. Really, all that you get, it doesn't get foamy, it doesn't get creamy, it doesn't feel silky. You can just feel the resistance of it, the inherent thickness to the beer, as well as that heavy body when you swallow. It's definitely got real presence to it. Now, with these ingredients in this format without the lactose, there's no underlying sweetness, which I really, really like. Just because you add a bunch of different ingredients in a beer doesn't mean you have to put lactose in to let them speak. And especially in something like a big barrel-aged Imperial Stout, I prefer to not have it. I want to taste that roasty edge of the malts. And in this, it's very, very roasty, very, very deeply roasted. There's borderline suggestions of a coffee-like quality coming from the depth of the roast. And there's definitely some nuanced underlying cacao sense. There's a nice earthiness to it too. So they clearly used very, very deeply roasted malts, and plenty of them. That's clear. They were not shy about it. I don't know the exact bourbon barrel or brand that they used for aging or how long they left it in the barrels, but it's nice. It's not oppressive. It adds another layer, another dimension to this beer, but it doesn't overwhelm the underlying flavor of the beer. So the malts, you really can taste quite clearly, just as you can taste that vanilla, just as you can taste that coconut. They all have their part to play, and they all have their own independent voice, but absolutely work beautifully, beautifully together. I'm going to jump back in for another sip here, let it re-intensify, make sure I didn't miss anything, and then we'll talk about the finish. Yeah, it's an impressive amount of resistance. Nice and weighty when you swallow. It feels very substantial in the mouth. Immediately on that swallow, you get that slight booziness, and then it really starts to come on, tasting of bourbon. After about 5 seconds of that slow intensification, the underlying roastiness of the malt bill starts to creep up. That's when you're really starting to get a real sense of the underlying malt bill that's the backbone of this beer. As that intensifies, it starts to give you these underpinnings of the cacao, that kind of earthiness, and there's really a little bit of bitters that come through as well, because it is obviously a lot of malt here, deeply roasted, and it does give a little back of underlying bitters. In the mix of all that, that vanilla comes through, binds very, very strongly to that bourbon, and the coconut, again, it's in the background. And that kind of mixes with the bourbon and the vanilla as well. That's where the coconut comes through. Stays completely away from the malt side of the flavor profile here, and it steers completely clear of any of the sense of bittering. So it's got all these different little aspects, and they all kind of pop one out of the next, one after the next, and then they just kind of blend together in the way that they blend. And then there's kind of these binded flavors, and then there's the underlying malt intensity flavors that are kind of resting underneath and giving the backbone for all of it. In terms of the length of the finish, this one is pretty long. There's a lot of intensity of flavor that happens here, and really where it ends on the back of the palate is lingering bourbon with a little bit of that underlying earthiness from that roasted malt. So you get a nice mix of the bourbon residual as well as an underlying malt bill on the back end. It's not dry at all. It's nice and wet and round to the end. Definitely longer than average finish. These are pungent flavors that they beautifully balance together in this beer. I'm a fan of this one. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Trimtab Brewing's Language of Thunder Cumulus, an Imperial Stout clocking in at 9.7% ABV, bourbon barrel aged, brewed with Madagascar, vanilla, and coconut. Trimtab Brewing is based in Birmingham, Alabama. So starting with the aroma on this beer was very pronounced. I could smell it from a good 1.5 feet away. The bourbon smelled very, very crystal clearly, had a slight boozy aroma to it. You could definitely smell the vanilla and the coconut underneath. Aroma was fantastic. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, I was personally very pleasantly surprised with this. Certainly on the forefront was that bourbon barrel aging. I don't know what type of bourbon or how long they left it in there, but it was quite pronounced and it tasted very, very good. Little subtle underlying booziness. The vanilla also came through very, very clearly, really binded well with that bourbon barrel. And then just as with the aroma, the coconut was kind of riding underneath, but it was prevalent both in the aroma and in the taste, and I absolutely loved it. Tons of deep, richly roasted malts, a lot of earthiness, some slight bitters. Absolutely loved it. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was a weighty beer, 9.7%. It's an Imperial Stout. They didn't classify it Imperial, but in this ABV range it really is. So I'll call it thusly. But had a nice weighty body. It was certainly above average, but not the highest end. Slightly lower ABV. Overall, the body gets an 8 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, very similar story with the mouthfeel. It had a nice resistant mouthfeel. You could feel the thickness as you agitated around the palate. Didn't get creamy, didn't get foamy, didn't get silky, but you could feel that resistance as you moved it around the palate. Mouthfeel does get an 8 out of 10. For the finish, this was a much longer finish than your average Imperial Stout. And again, this is barrel aged. That always helps the cause. The barrel really did help push it out, but I was kind of surprised. On the end, that underlying earthiness and the bitters that came through from the malt bill also played their part at the end of the finish. So yes, that bourbon barrel was still prevalent, lingering on the back of the palate, but so was the earthy underlying roasted malt bill. I absolutely loved it, much longer than average. Finish gets a 9 out of 10. Head and retention, this one did a great job from poured from a bottle. Only missed top tier by 1 point in my opinion, so I did give it a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, this was absolutely pitch black as expected. Perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance, oh, the balance. This was one of those beers that really is just another one of those kind of master classes in balancing. The right barrel for the right amount of time, the right intensity and roasting of the malt bill that they chose to put in here, the right amount of vanilla and the right amount of coconut to let everything have its voice, the interplay of everything work cohesively and nothing really vying for attention. Even though both in the aroma and the flavor, the coconut was kind of in the background, it was still very clear. You could smell it, you could taste it. This was a beautifully balanced beer. Balance does get a 10 out of 10. Subjectively, I loved it. Fantastic first beer from a new brewer for me. 10 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Look, the stout marketplace is very crowded. Barrel-aged stouts, certainly plentiful. Take your pick. They're all over the place. This, for my money, was a very, very well done. Maybe a little bit more delicate than your average barrel-aged stout. And I called it Imperial. They did not. But 9.7, that's not a low ABV. So I think that's a correct classification. But it's not one of those giant 12, 13, 14% Imperials. So there is some deviation, but this beer for me was the whole package. It had a wonderfully selected ingredient list. The balance on it was absolutely top tier. Everything had its voice and worked together to make the beer drinking experience what it was. And I loved it. I think it deserves a perfect score as an example of the style. And it did get so, 10 out of 10. Which brings the total score on Trimtab Brewing's Language of Thunder Cumulus to a 94 out of 100. Guys, if you like big barrel-aged flavored stouts, this is definitely one that I can highly recommend. Only lost a few points in a few categories, nothing critical. Absolutely fantastic first beer to try from a new brewer. I am a big, big fan of this one. This was a well done, exquisitely balanced beer. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.